I'm Vance Bars, founder of Your Dedicated Fiduciary, otherwise known as YDF, and also the producer of the Let Them Go series, where we explore all aspects of what is known as female covert narcissism and other cluster B personality disorders. Before we jump into today's episode of Let Them Go, I like to keep my attorneys happily employed, so nothing discussed today should be misconstrued as legal advice, nor should it substitute as mental health services. If you feel like you are in a clinically narcissistic relationship, please do reach out to a qualified practitioner in your area. Now, with that, we have a very, truly special guest today, the one, the only, Richard Grannon. Richard, welcome to Let Them Go.
Thank you very much for having me on, Vance. I appreciate it.
Richard, for those who might not know, is an author, subject matter expert on clinical narcissism and other cluster B personality disorders. He is a speaker and the international ambassador of an entity known as Tar Anon Network. And I'm really excited to have Richard here because if you Google or YouTube anything, literally anything on clinical narcissism, all of his many years of content come up. And I'm really looking forward to picking his brain on, very specifically, how to spot a female covert narcissist. And here's why. When we hear the term narcissist, we often think of what is called the grandiose, egomaniacal, condescending guy, right? Like the typical guy with the Napoleonic syndrome who suffers from self. But that is not the only type of narcissist. There is what is called the covert, vulnerable, or fragile narcissist. So, Richard, I want to start with the basics. What are the definitional criteria for clinical narcissism?
That's a very good question. And yes, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and then I've been involved in studying this, mainly self-taught, for the last 12, 13 years now. And I've always used the American manual for that. So the American Psychiatric Association publishes something called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And American psychiatrists and American clinicians are aware that the diagnostic criteria that are currently used are not fantastic. So you have 9 equally weighted irritating behaviors that if you can observe in a client, and if they're doing 5 of the 9 of them, you get the diagnosis of clinical narcissistic personality disorder. One of these behaviors, or one of these diagnostic criteria, is called a haughty demeanor, which basically means behaving arrogantly. So this is known amongst American clinicians as being a weak definition. It was part of a little bit of a polemic, a controversy back in 2010, where it was nearly withdrawn completely as a personality disorder from the DSM. So I use the DSM. I speak a lot to American psychiatrists and psychologists, and it is known that the current definition that we have is weak. It's also known, to your point, that the current definition is the classic, grandiose, masculine-coded definition. So yes, boastful, entitled, bullying, exploitative, tyrannical, very much of a yang positioning. It's do as I say or else, do as I say because I'm brilliant, I'm wonderful, I'm handsome, I'm rich, and so on and so forth. The feminine coded form of narcissism, frankly, isn't as well understood clinically. It's just not as studied clinically. And so it's much harder to see. And it is a clinical problem because many female narcissists are being misdiagnosed or overdiagnosed with borderline personality disorder instead. Yes, it's hard to see vulnerable feminine coded narcissism, much harder. And that clinicians are people too. They're human beings too. They can be tricked. They can be fooled by a smart client, of course.
So that actually begs a really important question, which is how can the typical sort of marriage and family therapist learn more on how to spot either female covert narcissism or borderline personality disorder for very specifically the female partner in a relationship when they are there working on marital issues or relationship issues wherein she is no matter the circumstances, always the victim, and he is always the villain. How do we solve that problem?
I try to stick to the clinical literature as much as I can. As I said, it's usually the more American and the European side of the Atlantic I've stuck with, just because that's what I've known over the years. I think what I would say to marriage counselors, relationship therapists, this is my guideline, not the clinical consensus guideline. If you have a client who's highly identified with a vision of themselves as being the victim no matter what, if you have a client or you're seeing a pattern of behavior where no matter what the person has done or is doing or how abusive they're behaving, it's someone else's fault. If you have a client who their very identity seems to be dependent on the notion of their peculiarly unique suffering and the way in which they're a victim in a way in which no other human being could possibly comprehend or understand because nobody's ever suffered as much as they have. If we see a heavy reliance on a sob story, and to be clear, this isn't just a frank opening up a moment of vulnerability about a terrible thing that happened, but it seems to be a critical part of their self-identity, and all roads lead to Rome. Every argument and every avenue of discovery that you as a counselor or a marriage therapist, a relationship therapist is trying to go down, you end up back at this sob story. You end up back at this pity me scenario. And the reason for that is fairly simple in terms of narcissistic personality disorder. The core of narcissistic personality disorder is a false sense of self, a grandiose sense of self. In the classic, it would be grandiose as in I'm wonderful, but this is grandiose as in I'm uniquely victimized and uniquely wretched. So that's the grandiosity, it's inverted. And you would also see a rigidity. So they should also be looking for so we can have conversations and we can talk about how Tom spoke to Mary and Mary responded within a narrow bandwidth. But once we start stepping outside of that, the counselor, the therapist will see heavy defense and heavy denial of anything that goes outside of a certain map of viewing the relationship. So rigidity is not one of the diagnostic criteria, but it probably should be. It's because the essence of narcissistic personalities, grandiose or otherwise, is control and power. So naturally rigidity follows in that path.
So that is remarkably helpful, and thank you for that. And I want to take a moment really as a prelude to the next part of our conversation to share that I've spent upwards of the last 18 months, Richard, deeply studying cluster B personality disorders with a particular emphasis on female covert narcissism for various reasons. But this passion project has taught me much. And oddly, there's this universal energy, if you will. There have been north of 10 men with whom I have become acquainted who happen to be either in relationships with either clinically diagnosed or strongly suspected female covert narcissists, or who are exiting, typically through divorce, relationships with these profiles. And there's a common theme among all of them where certain behavioral patterns really jump out in almost all of the cases. By the way, Richard, I'm not a coach. I don't do this for money. It just happened. And one of the typical cycles, if you will, that I hear from these men is that the relationship started with this fantastic romance, fireworks chemistry. You know, this is my soulmate. This is my ride or die. This is my person. Man, she was my person. And there's this crazy, just otherworldly type of romance that they have, followed by an idealization, not only just of him, but also of what the relationship can become, which I now understand is future faking. And it's typically very fast. These men jump into these relationships. They might move in very quickly together. And they take 5 years of change or natural evolution in a relationship cycle and condense it down into a very short amount of time. And then what happens is a longer sort of devaluation cycle where what might start as little nitpicks then evolves into pretty constant criticism and then a form of discard. So maybe she will stonewall him and give him the silent treatment. One of the micro patterns that comes out is anytime one of these guys or someone in their house, maybe it's kids, say something that is even remotely critical of the female covert narcissist, there is a pattern of explosion / eruption, followed by deflection, followed by finger pointing and blanket statements, you always or you never, followed by either victimhood or martyrdom, followed by either stonewalling or literally slamming a door and leaving the house. And that pattern happens over and over again. And then what I understand is that a trauma bond forms over time. And so the whole point of this interview is to pick your brain on how to spot a female covert narcissist early on to help these men avoid months, years, and possibly even decades of agony. What suggestions do you have?
It's interesting that we started out by making these distinctions between grandiose and classic narcissism, and vulnerable, fragile narcissism. But once you get past the face of it, the fundamental mechanics play out exactly the same way. Once I've got you in, you're in for the same ride, really, whether it's a grandiose or a covert narcissist, because it really is fundamentally about power. I think I've been in 2 of these relationships, and I don't have a list of red flags that I would offer, but I would say I wish that I had been more grounded and more emotionally mature. I wish I hadn't rushed. I wish I'd taken my time. I wish I'd been more self-aware. I didn't get any leadership or guidance in terms of having boundaries around intimate relationships. And I didn't know that it was frankly dangerous and irresponsible to just rush into one, because all I'd learned about relationships, I'd learned from either Disney movies when I was a kid or rom-coms as an adult. And so my head was full of, and I think a lot of men and a lot of women too, their head is just full of when it comes to this stuff. Mainly, I think it's hyper-conscientious men that will be targeted by the female narcissist. So if a man has a very strong sense of honor, a chivalric code that's very much out of step with modern culture. If I say I'm going to do a thing, I'll do it. Winners don't quit, quitters don't win. No man left behind. I'm loyal to the core. Great, wonderful, good for you. You're dealing with Satan, and all you're doing is helping that person abuse you. So your entire value system can be abused. I just didn't know that. I thought if I was a good man, I would be rewarded. Now, I don't know who told me that, because it's a silly thing. It's a very utopian, childlike belief. And so that's what I would say to men is we really have to tighten up our sense of what we want a relationship to look like, especially at this moment in human history, especially in the Western world. Values are changing very rapidly. There are no rules in relationships. You can have arguments that last days over what cheating is and what cheating isn't. Everybody's coming to relationships with their own individual rule book. So there is no collective sense of this is the appropriate way to behave in a relationship. And in such a boundaryless environment, exploitation thrives. So what I encourage men to do is to go within and explore for themselves philosophically what it means for them to be in a relationship and what they will and won't tolerate and what they think love is and what they think it is for. There is no personal salvation inside of a romantic relationship. There is no personal resolution inside of a romantic relationship. Romantic relationships don't do that. Philosophy and religion might, but romantic relationships can't. And that's something men and women in our culture, I think, need to learn.
So one of the things that I have shared with the men I've mentored is how important it is to get into therapy, because nothing screams manly man like going to therapy, but really understand the family dynamics, the family of origin. What did this Shakespearean play, if you will, look like in terms of who had which role? Was there a hero? Was there a scapegoat? What are the dynamics, for example, between having two parents, one of whom is high on the BPD or borderline personality disorder scale, the other of whom is high on the NPD or narcissistic personality disorder scale. And clearly, I'm not a clinician. I just do this stuff because I love it. But the DSM is available to everyone. We can look at certain behaviors. There's all kinds of material online and otherwise that can help us identify the behaviors. And it's really the impact of the behaviors on the other romantic partner, the family unit, and the kids that really become pretty significant. Another sort of common theme among these gentlemen that I've spent a lot of time with over the last year or so is that there's a lot of blame shifting. No matter what, the blame is somehow twisted and it's back on the male partner, whether boyfriend or husband. The boundaries constantly move. There are literally no boundaries. The goalposts move. So she might say, I'll be happy if you do more, insert the blank here. And he'll start doing those things. And then the unhappiness comes back in. There's more conflict. And then it's actually, I'll be happy if you do these things over here. And there's just this circling the drain of debate and conversation and conflict, followed by these periods of intermittent reinforcement where there's sort of mini love bomb cycles. So why is that? Why does it follow that pattern?
I'm glad you asked me that question.
Stick around for more.
So we live and have lived in a very sexist culture. And I found sexism in myself. Sexism against men is called misandry. Sexism against women is called misogyny. I know you know that, but some of the listeners might not know it. And I found myself saying of a relationship, the girl cheated on the boy, the woman cheated on the man. And I heard that and I said, oh, she must really have not been happy. He must really have been letting her down. And then I heard another story. A man had cheated on a woman. And I said, what a piece of that man is to betray that poor woman's trust. And then I went, hang the on. Hang on a second. How? That's not fair. What are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm just echoing, I guess. I'm just carrying the ideological map of my culture, which is that if a man does it, it's because he's a bad man. And if a woman does it, it's because he's a bad man. So I was like, all right, let's take a little look at this. I think biologically, there's no such thing as a cultural component, I don't think, that doesn't have a genetic element. Everything that we do is genetics and biology. It's silly to say that things are divided from that. And I think in nature, what happens is women have a different sexual selection process than men. So men, because when we procreate, our children's looks come largely from the female, and the children's IQ, the brains, come largely from the men. So men, when they're sexually selecting, it can be very much about beauty. It's very much about what's in the body. And for women, that's important. But what's even more important is a display of strength or capability. We see this with some birds, some fish, many mammals. I can't just look at a man and say he's beautiful. I can as a woman, but yeah, he's beautiful. Great. So what? I need to see him functioning in the world so that I can be reassured that our offspring have greater survivability, because my man has cunning and he has ability and he has strength and he knows how to network. He knows how to build communities and so on and so forth. And so at a genetic level, I think we're predisposed to being service providers. I think we're predisposed to offering service. So where I started with this years ago was I was teaching self-defense, and I was working mainly with American law enforcement officers, military, frontline security, and we would be doing the psychology of self-defense and aggression and how to avoid PTSD after violent conflict. And then the instructor or somebody would come up to me after the seminar and be like, hey, you're into that. You're into that psychology stuff, right? Yeah. I don't like shrinks. Oh, it's cool. I'm not a shrink. Yeah, that's why I'm talking to you. So my wife, right? My wife. And then I would hear this story again and again. And you get these guys who are in ultra masculine roles. They're literally in what we call the services. They're in the services. They're there to protect. They're first responders when there's a danger there, whatever else. And then they seem to go hand in glove with the vulnerable narcissist woman, because she can use that sense of honor and that service provision. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't provide service. I think men and women inside of a loving, authentic relationship should provide service, but consciously. And it must be done consciously. It's never going to be equal, but it should be fair. We should aspire not for equality, but for fairness. Equal rights, but no equality. It's about fairness. You want to make it fairness. You want to create a good symbiotic relationship. And my de facto value as a man within the relationship, if the baseline is set as, Richard, you have value because you make money, we need to at least address that as a couple. We need to at least talk about that and have a non-judgmental, good sense of humor, good-natured conversation about that. It can't just sit in the darkness. And I think this is a difficult conversation that we all need to be having. Otherwise, we can slip into this. You asked, how do we slip into it? We slip into it through cultural conditioning. A man is not just a service provider. A man is a human being with needs. And yes, if he needs to go to therapy, he should go to therapy, because that man is a human being too. We can't live in a world where women are humans and men are robots. That's crazy. But that is slightly the world that we live in now, which is why there's such a huge male mental health crisis. Who do men go to? Who are they allowed to speak to? To the therapy point, I would just say, look, if an engine is broken and you're a man, you should want to fix it. You can't see inside your own mind. You wouldn't try to fix an engine in the dark. You would either turn a light on or get a torch. That's what a therapist is. They show you the darkness. They light up the unconscious patterns inside of your mind. And that's how you can fix an engine effectively. That's my TED talk. I hope you all enjoyed it.
I look forward to the next edition. This is great stuff, truly. So as we talk, I have these different ideas that pop up, and this is not scripted. We're just hanging out, having a talk on female covert narcissism. Interestingly, the majority of these guys that I mentioned earlier all were going through significant life transitions. They may have been grieving, they may have been unemployed, but they had a lot of time to give to their female covert narcissist partner, making dinner before she gets home, largely doing a lot of the heavy lifting, if you will. But the point is, they had a lot of time to do basically everything and to cater to her needs. Now, making dinner for your female partner is phenomenal. I do it for mine. It's great, right? But what's interesting is that so many of them, once they became healed, or many of them were folks who had substance abuse issues, once they got sober, once they were gainfully reemployed, and they didn't have time to basically cater to all of the needs and so forth, the dynamic changed in the relationship. And that's when a lot of the devaluation would start. Why does it follow that pattern?
Because narcissism, one of the definite markers of narcissism is massive amounts of entitlement. And it is also, in my humble opinion, some clinicians disagree with me, it's delusional. So if you're dealing with a female narcissist, you're dealing with a little Disney princess. And she believes that she has a right to everything all the time, all at once, and that you should be there to serve her. You should be a chauffeur. You should be an ATM. You should be a cleaner. You should be a sex machine, an orgasm provider, all of this. And I think we've entered an interesting phase culturally where, quite frankly, there are a lot of thuggish female chauvinists around because the guardrails are off, because you can be. There's no shame in it. Nobody's going to shame you. They'll go, yeah, they'll applaud you. They'll go, yay, girl, you go, you slay. And for a minority of women, that's become an opportunity to use the English expression, take the piss, to really be exploitative, to really just go too far and take advantage. When you're in a relationship with a narcissist, male, female, grandiose, or covert, you're on the set of a movie and it's their movie. They're the director, they're the producer, they're the main actor, and they're the editor. If you don't follow the script you've been assigned, you will be punished. And if you keep resisting the script you've been assigned, you'll be kicked off set and you'll be replaced. You are a thing to be used. And that's harsh and might be quite a hard thing for some people to hear if they're still embroiled in a relationship with a narcissist and they love them. But that really is the way a narcissistic personality disordered individual views their partner. It's brutal. It's absolutely barbaric.
So interestingly, you just reminded me of several of these guys who literally went through multiple years of marriage counseling with their female partner. And I want to be clear for viewers here, and if this ends up becoming a podcast for listeners, all of you at home, basically, this is not to discredit the true female victims who are in abusive relationships with men. I want to be really clear about that, because in today's society, we got to make sure that we point these things out. This is focusing specifically on men who have been in very emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically abusive relationships with women who are either clinically diagnosed as female covert narcissists or who register very high in the toxic traits idiosyncratic to the disorder. In so many of these cases, Richard, these guys would spend years in marriage counseling, for example, with them. And then once he covered all of his healing and the therapist is, okay, I think we're pretty good to go. We've made a lot of progress. And it becomes her turn to do the therapy and to work on her and to discuss her family dynamics and so forth. It is Katie bar the door. Boom. She is out of there. She typically, or these female profiles typically would become so abusive, almost as if it's like they want the man to either leave the relationship or file for divorce, for the goal of being able to play the damsel in distress and to say, see, I'm the victim. He's deserting me. He's abandoning me. He's divorcing the family unit. What kind of father is he breaking up the family like this? And when that does not happen, then it flips to the martyr. And then she files for divorce and goes, look at me. I spent all this time developing the courage to leave this. He's a narcissist. This whole smear campaign ensues. And it's so fascinating because once you understand clinical narcissism, all of the behaviors leading up to, not only throughout the relationship, but leading up to the discard / divorce, whatever it is, and then throughout a divorce process, and then in co-parenting situations, it's like the handwriting is on the wall. You know the playbook, and it's just absolutely fascinating stuff, not only to learn about, but then to also help educate the masses. Because, Richard, I feel like so many people don't understand that there are even cluster B personality disorders out there. So what would you have for a guy who has been brutally discarded? He's felt like he's walked into this house of mirrors after years of being in a relationship like this. Give us
Given, what was the last thing you said? Given the what?
Give us a silver lining. Like the guys who are going through this, what optimism can you share?
I think we don't have in our culture anymore an initiation ceremony from boyhood to manhood. And this is an excellent time to embrace that. You don't want to live as a teenager forever. Some of us have to do it in our 40s, which is a little later than perhaps we would like, but it is what it is. I'm in therapy now. I go once a week, every Friday, 1 p.m. I stay with it. And that's been part of my procedure for taking my life and my energy and my efforts and my love back out of the hands of people who were stealing it. Quite frankly, they were con artists and they were stealing it. The silver lining is that you're living a half life. And probably, if you're being really honest with yourself, the guy you were before the relationship really needed a little bit more work. He needed a little bit more development, let's say, in the Jungian sense, in terms of individuation. You mentioned many men who get into these relationships, they've gone through a grieving process, or they've changed city, or they've just lost their job. That's typical of a narcissistically abusive relationship. They will target somebody who's in a moment of vulnerability. So if you were vulnerable, now is the moment to become less vulnerable and to strengthen, and not in some weird performative way from the outside in, where you try and convince the world that you're strong, but from the inside out, by developing a better relationship with yourself. I think men are heavily encouraged in our culture to wear masks and to wear armor and to push down an awful lot of what they feel and what they think for the purposes of trying to keep the peace or fulfill a role, or just to avoid the pain of isolation. Because if you don't do as you're told, you'll just be shunned and you'll be on your own and nobody's going to care. So all of that masking and all of that armoring and shutting down of what human beings really feel and really are, it leads to a tremendous amount of pain. And we can see that when we just look at the statistics for people who are, you have to say, you can't say on YouTube, it's better to say unalive. People who are unaliving themselves, it's massively more men that are doing it. Who dies younger of heart attacks? Proportionately, it's massively more men. A lot of that is about emotional suppression, and not just emotional suppression, but thought suppression. I know that this isn't true. I know that this isn't real, but I'm going to say, yes, I believe you, darling, just to keep the peace, because you're the target of emotional terrorism. And you can't face the negative consequences that you're being threatened with. Again, that's a hell of a way to live. You're living as a slave. Quite an experience to live as a slave, to be forced to live on your knees. Now's the opportunity to grow as a man and to grow as a human being, and to say, I'm not doing that again. I'll never live on my knees ever again. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. The payoff is just not, it's not worth it. And I'm sure 100% of the men who followed you would agree. Whatever you got out of the relationship, it wasn't worth what was taken from you during the relationship.
100% agreed, Richard. I like to bring a lot of levity to these sort of real life, heavier conversations. One might argue it's a coping mechanism, but I also just love comedy. No discussion on clinical narcissism would be complete without the term flying monkeys entering the conversation. And I remember when I first learned of flying monkeys, and I'm reading this book, I'm going, I think insanity has entered the conversation. So I want to ask you a two-part question, like we're on television. What are flying monkeys? And also, why is it that so many of these flying monkeys fail to see the behavioral patterns of these clinical narcissists when the evidence is literally right in front?
So the flying monkey is a reference to the Wizard of Oz and the Wicked Witch of the West, who sends out these mutant monkeys with wings to go and chase Dorothy and her friends and to terrorize them. And what that means effectively is the pathological personality is instrumentalizing weaker-minded people to do their bidding on their behalf. And they say, okay, this is what's happened. Go and attack them. Go and say this about them. Run a smear campaign about them. Why do people do it? I think there's a dark side of human psychology that needs to collectively band together and victimize a person. There's a joy in scapegoating, which is why the ancient Jewish practice of putting the sins of the tribe into a goat and then pushing it out into the wilderness to die of exposure existed. That's why we have the term scapegoating. It's a deep part of human psychology. The people who do it in modern culture, pretty universally, are fairly low IQ or spiritually weak. They're very weak people, and they want to be part of something. They want to be a part of the drama. In my experience with flying monkeys, I don't believe anybody was doing it in good faith. I don't believe anybody who went along with what my ex was saying about me and allowed themselves to be instrumentalized truly believed with total naivety the story she was giving them. I know that they didn't, based on comments that I had recorded in my mind earlier. They knew that she was a very difficult person. They knew that she was highly confrontational. They knew that she was a hypocrite. And yet, when the time came, when the knives were out and it was my turn to be scapegoated, they couldn't wait for their turn to put the knife in. And I just thought, this is you're doing this because you need this. You need to experience this. Some resentment, some unprocessed rage, something. They were acting, all of them, in my experience, they were all acting in bad faith. You might get some true useful idiots, like the old Stalinist, communist term, the useful idiot. You can train people to believe something that just isn't true and then just convince them to go and do it. There probably are some real dummies out there who are just like, you're pretty, so you must be telling the truth. That definitely can happen. But yes, it is a dark psychological procedure. And the flying monkeys moment is part of the smear campaign. Why does it work that way more with feminine coded narcissism? Because women are physically weaker, so they're evolved to know that they need to recruit from the collective to get collective strength. That's why they go and tell their girlfriends everything. That's why they go to their family and tell them everything. Things that you thought were private in the relationship that were just between you and her are common knowledge apparently out there. And it's one of these differences between men and women, that we just need to be savvy to the different genetic predispositions in human behavior between men and women, I think.
Surviving a smear campaign is one of the things that has come up very commonly in the men with whom I have worked over the last year. And it's interesting because their ex-female partners would go to the PTA moms, the town gossip, the whoever, and literally lie to their face, right? They would create a fabricated version of the story where she's the victim, he's the villain. And there's this initial, handful of weeks to maybe even upwards of a year period in which a lot of those aforementioned people, some flying monkeys, some people are just in the community, believe her story. But what these gentlemen have found is that as they heal, as they recover, and as they live their best lives, they are literally the best father they could possibly be to their kids and just living life. YOLO, bro. What ends up happening is the collective conscience goes, wait a minute, hold on a second. We were told that he's an abandoning father. He's an absentee husband. He is a narcissist, right? He's all these evil things. And as people get to know these men, they're able to form their own opinions. And ultimately, Richard, the truth always comes out, right? It just through observing anecdotal behavior.
I think so. I think your best defense is your observable behavior. Actions speak louder than words. I think there is this temptation within a smear campaign, because of the nature of the abuse, you can get pulled down to the narcissist level of consciousness, which is an infantile one, where you want to defend every single slight. And you want to say, no, she's accusing me of that because she did that. But she knows that if she accuses me of it first, it muddies the water, so that when I tell you that it was her, you'll think, no, he's only saying that because, and you just think, in my case, the last time, it was a man who ran a smear campaign. A man who wrote the manual on smear campaigns ran a smear campaign on me in public. And I did nothing. I decided to do nothing. This guy's an expert in it. And I just stayed still. I was like, I'm going to continue to do my work. I'm going to continue to put out good material. I'm going to continue to work with people and do good work in the world, as I have the entire time. A contingent of people is going to choose to believe him. But to reiterate what I said earlier, I think 90% of them are just acting in bad faith. They know he's what he is. They know full well. And then maybe 10% of them are just dumb. They're just really stupid. If a guy has the word narcissistic abuser on the tin and writes a book called How to Run a Smear Campaign, and then smear campaign somebody, and you believe him, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you've definitely failed an IQ test there, at least in my eyes. So it's back to this thing of, don't fight for the truth, because it's not really about the truth. The truth is seen, the truth is shown. Just live, be a good father, be a good man, continue to contribute, live your highest values, don't sink to their level. I think that's the provocation. Come down into the mud, come down into the shit with me, and let's start slinging poop at each other. Don't do that. Don't do that. Rise above.
So really, you are bringing up what is known as gray rocking, and it's interesting when the aforementioned men truly adopt the gray rock method. They give zero emotionality to the former female partner. There are no reactions. There's literally zero oxygen given to her. Can you talk about what the gray rock method is and how one can adopt it?
Yes, for years, this was attributed to me because I did a viral video in 2015 about it, but it's absolutely not mine. I got it from an online blog on narcissism. Gray rocking is just, as you say, it's being non-reactive. The gray rock is boring. The gray rock won't talk back to you. The gray rock is dull. I'm in the cluster B spectrum of personality disorders with narcissism. In the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the cluster B spectrum is also called the dramatic personality disorders. So these are the disorders: narcissism, histrionic, borderline, antisocial. They create and feed on drama. What happens if there's no drama? It's like saying, what do you do with no oxygen? They have to go somewhere else to breathe. And if you give them nothing, no food, there's no supply here, madam, there's no supply here, they can keep going for a little while, but usually their impulse control is so poor and they're so high in tendency to conflict that they have to move on. And the woman who's smearing you in your hometown, wherever you are in America, I know the San Diego area, and I can think of like parents associations there that I know about. That woman who's doing that in a community of, say, 120 people who all know each other, how long do you think it's going to be before she finds conflict with the next person and the next person? And then she was screaming at the kids' basketball game, and then she borrowed money off Sally and didn't pay it back. And then there was that time she got drunk and they out themselves. Stand back. These people will out themselves. Their impulse control is dreadful. Their emotional dysregulation is high. Yeah, you may endure a rough couple of months, but I've never seen a narcissist who can keep it up, especially if they're not drawing anything from it. They don't have the patience. They're not disciplined people.
Richard, that actually reminds me of one example where this guy shared with me. He goes, Vance, my ex-wife and I worked together, and in the process of the divorce, I gave her money to furnish her new house. And she went around and did not share that detail with other folks and was given furniture by people in anticipation of the move. And some of those people went to the ex-husband and were like, how could you not help this woman? She's the mother of all 4 of your kids. I just don't understand. And he literally would go, here's the check that cleared specifically for the furniture. And the look on their faces, priceless, right? So there's just this manipulation and this victimhood that happens. And it's just a fascinating thing. By the way, San Diego, lovely place. Hope everyone comes and visits it. That's where I spend ample time. And it is truly America's finest city, Richard.
Do you know where North County? That's where my sister lives, up in North County. So hopefully I'll be there in November, I hope.
Hey, we need to clear the calendar. Anyway. So Richard, this has been hugely informative, and I cannot thank you enough. What would you like to share with viewers on how to find you and the different resources that you and your business have available?
We have a lot of things available for the victims of narcissistic abuse. I really want to make this new YouTube channel that's called Awakening Strength that's out this week. So if people could go to Awakening Strength and subscribe there, I'm going to have interviews with psychologists, with coaches, with men who've been through this experience. And it's not just going to be about delivering content that helps you to identify covert and to recover, but I'd really like to create a community for men, because men can be a bit funny about creating communities unless it involves shooting things or breaking each other's arms, doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or so. Just have a community for the sake of having a community. Let's give it a go, chaps. I'm sure we can be there and support each other. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. So Awakening Strength is the one. Otherwise, they can go to richardgrannon.com. There's a bunch of resources there for them too.
So what type of resources specifically? As I understand it, you have multiple courses. Is that correct?
I have multiple courses that if people are sure that they've been in a narcissistically abusive relationship and they are struggling to recover, I have multiple courses, but there's one I recommend. It's called The Complete Guide to Deprogramming from Narcissistic Abuse. If you are in therapy or you have a counselor, we add the therapist or the counselor to the course for free so that you can go through the course piece by piece. It's 15 modules long. It takes a couple of months to get through. It's a very thorough course, but by the end of it, my ambition is you'll never need another course on it again, and you'll never be attracted to a narcissistically abusive relationship again.
And what about social media platforms? Where can people find you there?
I'm active on Instagram and TikTok as well.
Lovely. So we always like to end with positive messaging. And for the guys out there, the name of this platform literally is Let Them Go. Let them go, become the best version of you, go live your life. If you've lacked sleep for many years, you're gonna sleep better than you could have ever possibly imagined. If you've been seeing in black and white, you'll see in color again. Go be that Disney dad. Go live your life. Richard Grannon, thank you so much for joining us today. I cannot tell you how appreciative I am. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. Thank you, gents.
It's a pleasure. We'll have to have you back.